So thanks very much all of you for coming. You're very welcome. So my name's Jane Carney. I work for Mountaineering Ireland as their training officer, and each year we run 4 meets. This one I'm going to talk to you about this evening is the Summer Alpine Meet, and we're going to go to Saas Grand in Switzerland, which is also a fairly famous ski area, but is home to a number of 4,000 metre peaks, probably the most densely populated area, if you like, of 4,000 metre peaks in the Alps. We've got a number of courses that we're going to run, as we always do, training courses for skills to enable people to do their own thing, and also people turn up and do their own thing having the skills already and meet other people so that they can do other peaks and share some knowledge and experience new climbs, new walks, new treks. We of course are going to be in the vicinity of the Matterhorn. Not that this is the Matterhorn, but it's a pointy peak, but we have some fairly substantial mountains that you can go and visit in this area. So on the courses that we have on offer, we have walking courses and trekking courses. They'd be run at a slightly higher ratio of 1:6. And like this group here, you would be walking across perhaps glaciated terrain or perhaps travelling from hut to hut to experience the high peaks, but not necessarily the very technical ground that goes with some of the routes up the high peaks. To do that, when you're travelling across glaciers, you would quite often rope up so that should one person fall into a crevasse, the rest of you can hold them and hopefully get them back out safely. So even though it's walking, it's still got extra skills that you are not going to need to have knowledge of when you're walking in Scotland or in winter in Ireland or just on the hills in Ireland. So it adds an extra dimension to your alpine mountaineering experience that you have harnesses and helmets, crampons and axes. So this would be fairly typical terrain that you might see when you're trekking. People walking around in shorts, reasonably hot sunny days, plenty of sun cream required, a bit different to your winter Scotland most years, and that you can see long distances, you can see the next valley, you can have a look at all around you on ground that you're relatively comfortable on as a walker or a mountaineer. And the way that the Alps are made accessible by teleferiques and tracks and paths, signposts, guidebooks, it's quite a different experience to walking in the likes of Scotland, where you're making your own routes into things, and you have kind of limited choices, I suppose. In the Alps you can travel to another valley or another area if the weather's bad and experience rock climbing or mountaineering or ice climbing or via ferrata. So to give you an idea, these people have been moving into more mountaineering terrain, so they have there the ropes I was telling you about, ice axes, crampons, and you can see just in the left of the picture there the seracs and crevasses that you're protecting yourself from falling into or off of by roping yourself up with your team. But yet you're still walking around the place, and obviously you can see there it's quite sunny, but they're still wearing clothes to cover their skin and gloves on their hands in case they slip. The snow can be quite harsh on the skin if you slide across it. But yet the terrain around them, the scenery is quite spectacular and lends itself to much more difficult climbing and mountaineering, should you choose to. So this is the area that we're going to go to. It's served by a number of airports, making it quite easy to get into. And as I said, it's a ski area, so the airports have plenty of different options for linking the airport to Saas Grand. We're also very lucky. Whilst Switzerland's quite an expensive location to live and eat and stay in, the campsite that we're going to use provides a pass that means once you're in the valley you don't have to pay for the travel up and down to the huts. It's included in the price of the campsite. So it's
ski lifts,
yeah, the teleferiques in it's called the Burger Pass. So it means that you can kind of budget. You know that you're going to be spending so much money on your camping and your passes, and equally it means then that you don't necessarily have to stay in huts. You can get the lifts up and down and carry on and achieve your objectives in a day. So it's for everyone. There's plenty of different activities that you can take on whilst you're in the Alps. You'd see people of all ages, you'd see kids and their parents, old and young, people there climbing, rock climbing, multi-pitch climbing, cragging, high alpine routes, walking, trekking, cycling, kayaking, canoeing. Like, there's loads of different things that you can do in the Alps, and they're really good at making it accessible for people. It's primarily German speaking, but there will be an element of Croatian and French spoken in the area, so between one or other language you might be able to piece together enough to get the information that you need.
Croatian?
Yeah. It's a variation, but it's there. So it is for everyone. Like all our meets, the ethos is to try and enable and facilitate people to getting out into the mountains themselves, not necessarily to be guiding people up things or along things that they wouldn't otherwise ever want to do themselves or be able to do themselves. We want to try and enable, not do it for you. So the guides come along, and there's a great ethos in the evening times where people will chat to each other, share experiences on routes they've been on that day, what the conditions were like, and equally well you can pair up with people and get a feel for them before you go climbing with them or walking with them, and maybe make some friends and share some experiences on the hills with people that you meet during the week. And you can go in groups then after, maybe if you've done a training course, then you can head off in groups and go and put some of those skills into practice with company. Very sociable that way. In Switzerland, and as in the rest of the Alps, if you're going to be paid to work in the Alps, you need to be a mountain guide or have your international mountain leader if you're not going on glaciated terrain. So it's very strict. You can't operate or work out there unless you're qualified, and it kind of brings to it a level of competence and a level of experience, and also a relatively good level of safety. However, the Alps are quite a large area of risk to manage. I've just returned from the ski meet and was watching the ski guide in operation on terrain that was definitely avalanching, had just avalanched to the side of us and was showing lots of evidence of avalanche falling down the slopes. And me, from my Scottish background, thinking, well, I'd be gone down the hill now, I'd be turning around and going back. But in the Alps, it's not quite so simple, because going back meant crossing slopes that were far more dangerous than the one we had left to finish to get up to the hut. So the level of judgment and decision making of the guide is substantially higher, and equally substantially as much respect shown for the mountains. They can all have incidents where they have to choose between one risk and another risk, and decide which one is the lesser of the two. So, for example, in that situation, we could see that the slope was avalanche prone, and the guide had judged that it was not significantly deep enough for it to be impassable, but that we should spread out. So should one person be avalanched, that the rest of us could find them. We were wearing transceivers, so we would be able to locate them fairly quickly. And we were on skis, so you can't necessarily rope up when you're skiing, not unless you're a very expert set of skiers. So the level of judgment required, and that's why I think mountain guides are pretty important when they've got groups to look after. You need to have that level of expertise and neck to be able to make those judgment calls. So, as we've said, people get together. You can pick the brains of the guides. They're quite happy to share. You'll find them in most evenings discussing guide routes with each other, and also with the people in their group, and also with the people just on the meet doing their own thing. Most evenings are spent talking about routes, the weather, the conditions, the snow, and what's happening for the rest of the week. It's a little bit nerdy, but that's what you do when you're out on meets. And that's what you'll find yourselves doing over the week. And of course we have our famous barbecue in the middle of the week, which is usually good crack, plenty of music and lots of meat and vegetables to cook on the barbie. So we expect some turns to be done. Okay, so just to give you a feel of the terrain that you're going to be walking around in and climbing around, and if you've not been to the Alps, it's quite a powerful experience the first time that you do. I can still remember seeing my first glacier when I was, I don't know, about 18 or 19, and being so impressed, and then suddenly all of what I've been taught in geography clicking into place and saying, I understand now why that ice can do so much damage and carve into the mountains so much and have such an impact on the land around us. So, you know, even if you go just to see the glacier, it's well worth. It's a very powerful experience. You get into some quite serious mountaineering terrain as well, which unfortunately we don't have quite enough of. We have lots of it in Ireland, but I'd like more of it. It kind of really brings you out of the hands in pockets walking ground into the ground where you need to take your hands out. You might need to use a rope the odd bit to just prevent a slip from becoming a huge fall. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's very technical, it just is exposed, for example. So you're walking around in quite exposed terrain, seeing these beautiful views and going over passes and seeing the next valley. But you might be on a very narrow ridge with 1,000 meters dropping away on either side of you. So you're really there. You're in it. You know, you're exposed to the terrain, and it's a matter of making sure your steps are efficient and that you can move as well safely and efficiently, but quick enough to be safe. You can't spend all day going slowly and carefully because you won't make it down in time, or you won't make it to the hut in time. So there's an element of speed required to be safe when you're in the mountains. Some of the other views you might see. So the distances, they look quite deceptively close to the tops of peaks and the distances that you might travel. The air is quite clear, you can see further, and you'll find yourself looking at things like their false summits that you never get there. It takes much longer to reach the top. You think it's just over the next rise, but it actually is further. And you also have the other aspect of altitude, which we don't have to deal with in Ireland or Scotland on the higher peaks here. And anywhere from around 2,000 metres upwards you can be affected. And some people are affected this year but not next year. Fit people can be affected, unfit people can go out there and not have a problem with it. And generally you have to move that bit more slowly when you're in the Alps, pace yourself a bit more. You can't really afford to race, so it's just a matter of trying to keep a steady pace. I would recommend you do some training before you go so that you're hill fit, just to remove one element of struggle on the hill, and that you know that your legs and your lungs and your body is used to a bit of endurance on the mountains. And equally so, if in preparation for this, trips to Scotland, trips out in your crampons and your ice axe, and get used to moving around in that, or at least having a good read about it and watching videos about it to try and get a feel if it's all new to you. So during the courses, you're obviously going to reach tops, but equally the descent is quite often where people struggle. You get to the top and they're obviously very happy and elated that they've arrived there safely, but that's only half the journey. So descent is something that you also need to practice doing, and a lot of climbers are very good at going up, and walkers, and then switching off on the way down, which is why I suppose you're tired. It's later on in the day, you've switched off a little bit, that people start to move less efficiently and trip up perhaps, and so on. So it's important that you refuel at the top and kind of take a look at the map and take stock of where you're at, and then head down as efficiently as you came up. So we talked earlier a little bit about the huts, the refuge. We are putting on a hut-to-hut walk called the Spaghetti Traverse, which is a high route course, travelling between, like I say, covering some 4,000 metre peaks. There's quite a lot of them, and using the alpine huts, and there's a whole skill to using huts as well, being able to get in and out of the room without plastic bags rustling, being able to get up and out in half an hour, leaving at 3 or 2 o'clock in the morning so you get a nice early start before the sun hits the slopes. All of those kind of things. Bringing earplugs so that you don't get woken up every 2 minutes, people rustling with the plastic bags, and just carrying light as well. You don't need to bring a lot of gear to the huts, just as a sheet bag liner, your spare clothes and your equipment, and some food and drink. It can be quite expensive to buy drink in the huts because obviously they have to get everything flown in. So bringing tea bags and asking for hot water at the hut can be a quite good way of rehydration that's not too expensive. And they also, in some of the huts, make what's called marsh tea, which is a bit like herb tea, and you can fill your flask in the morning and drink as much of it as you like in some of the huts. And again, it's not going to break the bank, but buying bottled water might be, 2 or 3 Swiss francs or euros, depending on which side of the border you're on, per bottle, and you get quite thirsty high up. There's no running water in some of them, so you can't just fill up from the taps. So it is just about thinking about that. Because there's no running water in a lot of them, there's not that much point bringing a big wash kit. Some wet wipes maybe, some alcohol wipes or something like that, so that you can clean up a mess if you need to, and freshen yourself up, and toothbrush and the usual kind of bits and pieces. But you don't need sleeping bags and sleeping mats and so on, so you can travel pretty light. So we've talked a bit about the hut to hut walk. We also do adventurous walking. Again, that would be on a 1:6 ratio, which will dictate that you're going to be on easier terrain, possibly going across passes onto glaciers. So you still kind of get the experience of walking roped up and learning how to tie on and travel in your crampons, use your axes. But to really just permit you to travel through the terrain and to see beyond the next valley. As climbers, we quite often walk into a route, climb the route and walk back out again. As a trekker, you're travelling, you're journeying, and it can be very technical ground as well as a trekker. You can be on knife edge ridges with big exposure. You're only walking, but you can't afford to trip up or slip. So there's a reasonable amount of difficulty that you have to manage, be it in your head or technically, when you're walking. So there's some pictures here just from the spaghetti trail I was talking about. They call it the spaghetti tour because it goes into Italian huts. One called the Margherita, and I can't remember the rest of the names of all of them, but the Italian huts are not so expensive as the Swiss huts. But you're in 4,000 metre peak terrain every day. You can do it between 3 and 5 or 7 days, and you can clock up to about 4,000 metre peaks if you're fit enough and want to. So there's quite a lot there to do. Now 4,000 metres is quite high to go as well, so you may choose to do a few bits and pieces before that to get acclimatised, and then set off on a few days and just see how your body tolerates it. But it isn't necessarily that the ground is difficult, but more managing the altitude and working at height where you're tired. Your body's struggling. So that's another ridge. I'm sure how well you can see that picture. There's a couple of people just the bottom left. So again, that terrain isn't that difficult or that technical. It's quite banked out in snow, but if you take off some of that snow, then you'll be on some quite rocky, exposed slopes. So the conditions will dictate sometimes the difficulty of the climbs or the walks. And the same way in Scotland or in winter, in any conditions, if it's hard or if it's soft. If you're walking in the sunshine, then you've got quite soft snow, or if it's early in the morning, it'll be quite crisp and you can move over it quite easily. So those kind of things will affect, and that's why you have these early alpine starts. But equally so, if the snow is hard, you feel very much exposed because you're on it. And if you trip up, you'd slide across it, whereas if it's soft, you can be in it. If you trip up, you'll just collapse into it. So, it's a different experience. So getting some familiarity with being on exposed slopes, be on scree slopes in the likes of Glendalough or whatever, or up on the ridges in Kerry, Connemara, just so that you get used to some of that exposure and walking confidently in it. That will help when you're preparing for something like this. So yeah, we were talking about exposure. So you can see the people there using what's called via ferrata. So it's like an iron cableway that you can clip onto, which doesn't stop you falling. If you trip up, you slide down the cable, but you won't fall down off the route. And there's quite an expansive via ferrata across the Alps that were kind of used for the military to travel through terrain, but also there's been some put up now for people in the valleys to play, if you like, just to clip onto and go and bring their kids up for an hour or two. So there's a whole mixture of that side of enjoying the mountains as well, which you may not find in Scotland or in Ireland or the UK. Okay, so After the trekking courses, we've got a series of alpine courses: intermediate, introductory and advanced. The ratios decrease as you go up through the levels, so an introductory course would be 1 to 4, and because it's 1 to 4 it kind of limits you to what you can do on the terrain. It's introductory of the fundamental skills, so it'd be using crampons, axes, roping up together, moving efficiently in crampons or on hard snow or cutting steps. It's not basic, it's the fundamentals. So you kind of, as seasoned walkers in Ireland, it's not a step down to go on a walking course in alpine mountaineering, it's really mountaineering. So it is introducing a lot of new skills. A good few people would ring and are not sure whether, well, I've done a lot of walking and I do a bit of scrambling, do I really need to do the intro course? I've never been to the Alps, and generally I would say yes, you do really need to go and do something like that. But equally, if you're a competent climber, you would manage on the intermediate course. There'd be a slightly lower ratio and possibly slightly more technical terrain. So you may be moving a bit faster, covering more ground, slightly more serious grades, if you like. So that's one way of pitching it. But do ring if you need to decide one or the other. If you're not sure about it or the advanced, for example, that we can have a chat and see where you're at. So the intro, the intermediate, and the advanced. The intermediate and the advanced are run at a 1 to 2 ratio. So obviously you can climb as a 3 and you can travel quite quickly on the ground. There's also quite a good bit of scrambling and mountaineering, rock climbing and mixed climbing in the intermediate to advanced courses. You're covering quite long climbs, so it'd be like doing a very long multi-pitch / mixed winter climbing route. And equally, you're going to be having to move fast, so a good level of fitness and competence at climbing, and an understanding of the ropes. They will, the guides will teach you that they'll show you what to do with the ropes to enable you to move more quickly. But be good for you to kind of have some understanding of how to belay, how to clip gear, how to put in the odd piece of gear using slings and carabiners. But they'll talk through a lot of that. But if you're going to progress up to the next levels, then a bit of rock climbing wouldn't be harmful. It would be very useful to get an idea of the rope skills. And that can be done in climbing walls or down at your local quarry or climbing club. So just some of the ridges. You can see the fellow in the middle ground there. Quite exposed terrain, huge big drops on either side of them. That would be fairly typical walking, scrambly kind of ground that you'd be moving around in. Just to give you an idea, with spectacular views and photography potential. And equally you've got summer rock climbing. So I've pulled out a few bits from the guidebook in the area. Quite technically difficult, some of the grades, so that will appeal to some of the more technical climbers. Your eyes lighting up. So yeah, I mean there is a limited amount of the lower grades, but there's certainly enough to keep you going. And I just pulled that from one website. There'll be a lot more there in detail once you're in the valley. And then that was just from climbing.ie, the UKCC's climbing. So you have some idea that there's quite a bit there to climb as well. And it's bolted, so you can go and push your grades and fall off reasonably confident that you're just going to slide a wee bit. Okay, you don't need to do a course. You can get your skills up, you can just turn up and go and do what you're used to doing and push yourself a wee bit, meet other people and bring yourselves along. You can do a course, but you don't have to. So the courses are run over a number of days. There are 6-day courses that include 5 days on the hill and a rest day. Those are for the alpine courses and the trekking courses. And there are 3-day versions of those courses as well that I'm going to put on in the middle, the weekend between. So we have a full day course the first week and a full 6-day course the second week, and a 3-day course in the centre. They've proved really popular last year. Someone just asked for them and they became the most popular course, so that people could do a short bit of training and then go off and do some more. So it's not as expensive and equally not so time consuming, so they can go and do some things themselves up on the hill. So if people want to put on a 3-day course and you have a group that fills the course, then we can equally get a guide and suit you on the dates. But at the moment we've just put one set of dates on for that in the middle. Alright, so in terms of your equipment, you bring your normal hill gear. You might go up a grade with your boots depending on what type of boot you have. You need something that would be suitable for the likes of Scotland, fairly rigid. If you're going to be using crampons, you don't want the boots to be flexing and the crampons not fitting properly. It's quite warm, but you will need something like a down jacket or a puffer jacket of some kind that's going to insulate you, and lots of layers so you can take them off in rain gear to keep warm and dry if it's windy or wet. Ropes, harnesses, helmets would be kind of part of your kit, and a few bits of screw gates and carabiners. There's a full list on the info pack on the website, and again, if you want to ring and ask questions about kit, you're welcome to do so, or the outdoor shops as well are pretty good at advising you on what's suitable for the Alps. The boots, there's a whole range of boots. It's not necessarily as cold in the Alps as it would be in Scotland in winter, but it can be. So unless you've got the luxury of buying 3 or 4 pairs of boots, then you might choose something that will do both jobs, but make sure that they're comfy before you head. And usually if you've unusual shaped feet, then an insole can be a pretty useful thing to get molded to your feet. They're a bit of expense to them, but you can take them in and out of the different boots that you use and just prevent blisters. But the newer boots are much better than the old plastic ones used to be. You don't hear so much talk about blisters anymore, thankfully. So, okay. So all the information's on the website, the booking forms, the information pack, and some details. And we'll put the video of this up, so if any people couldn't make it tonight, they can watch and listen to the presentation on the website. So, any questions?